The flames may be out, but a firestorm of controversy rages on after the assault on the Branch Davidian compound. Officials are starting to look for answers after doomsday in Waco.
Now, I was still a child in the 90s, but Waco and the Branch Davidians conjure thoughts of cults and violence and that creepy David Koresh. The siege at Waco, for better or for worse, was a cultural anomaly that Americans both gawked at and, frankly, mocked. 90s era comedians loved taking aim at David Koresh. Saturday Night Live did a whole making capes sketch about the Branch Davidian compound. And Koresh was the punchline of not just one, but two of David Letterman's top 10 lists. Top 10 signs you're not God. Number 1, you wouldn't be living in Waco. During my recent, unexpected Texas quarantine, I actually went to visit the Branch Davidian compound. Even though I didn't interact with anyone, I wish I had known back then what we all know now, which is that everyone should be wearing a mask. Wear a mask. I admit I wasn't sure what I expected to see at the compound. A burnt out lot? Ruins and destruction? Some sort of plaque? Not quite. We just pulled up to the Branch Davidian compound. It's beautiful, beautiful landscape, beautifully manicured, and there's just a nice little sign on the gate that says, "Come on in, visitors welcome, please leave a $10 donation." It's fascinating that they've left this open in this way. It never occurred to me that you could just show up outside of Waco, Texas, at the Branch Davidian compound where this took place and hang out. I would assume it would be entirely private property, closed off, or that there would be some sort of government marker or something, but the fact that the Branch Davidians themselves have put this together is not what I expected. Needless to say, this peaceful place is not the memory I have of Waco.
It's a heavily armed compound, a religious cult, their leader claiming to be Jesus Christ.
There's 150 Psalms here. Some people find it amazing that I know every one of them.
It was a mass suicide. Most of the Branch Davidians only did what David Koresh told them to do.
Before I started seriously researching what happened at the Branch Davidian compound, I thought they were a violent, suicidal cult who were brainwashed by their megalomaniacal leader, David Koresh, and needed to be rescued by law enforcement before the children were murdered. Basically, in my head, they occupied the same space as the Jonestown cult members. To be clear, I'm not setting out here to defend David Koresh, but the Waco siege was more nuanced than I originally believed. Plus, David Koresh believed he could raise the dead. More on that later. A brief primer. What are the Branch Davidians? Branch Davidians are an extremist group of Christians that broke away from the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Contrary to what a lot of people believe, the Branch Davidians were not founded by David Koresh, but a man named Victor Houtef in 1930. Nor were the Davidians named after David. In fact, Koresh actually changed his name to David Koresh in 1990. He was born with the name Vernon Howell, which sounds like the name of an 80s yuppie villain who tears down the local marsh filled with birds to build a bank. The Branch Davidians, like the Seventh-day Adventists, are a millennial movement. No, not those millennials. They are millennialists, those who believe that the Bible provides clues as to when Christ will return to Earth. Through inspired interpreters, aka prophets, millennialists like the Branch Davidians believe they can figure out when the end is going to be and prepare for it. Houtef, the founder, bought the Waco compound before his death in 1955, which he named Mount Carmel. By the time Vernon Howell, aka David Koresh, enters the picture and arrives at the Waco compound in 1981, Mount Carmel was in the hands of Houtef's follower Benjamin Roden. Vernon Howell is a Seventh-day Adventist in his early 20s with an encyclopedic knowledge of the Bible, bad blood with the mainstream Seventh-day Adventist Church, and an obsession with the Book of Revelation. Howell soon positioned himself as David Koresh, the sinful Messiah with a gift of prophecy. Why the sinful Messiah? Because how else could he truly judge sinners if he himself didn't sin? Jesus was born without original sin, so he didn't understand the people. That's, of course, the rap on Jesus, is that he wasn't good with people.
Will you please go away and leave me alone?
Koresh did understand the people, or so he claimed. Among Koresh's alleged sins were the physical and sexual abuse of children. He also believed that everything, from televisions to women, belonged to him.
People say you've been sleeping with the women here. Is that true?
No, only one. And she's tired of it. Now, I mean, she's tired of the accusations.
If a man married a woman, he was in effect stealing that wife from Koresh. Koresh had multiple wives, many of which were minors, one reportedly as young as 10, and he fathered 13 children. Don't really need to say this again, but I will. Not here to defend David Koresh. There's no nuance to child abuse. But what I do think is important to take into account is that while David Koresh was a criminal, the men, women, and children who followed him, while complicit, some of them, were also victims of both David Koresh's power over them and the FBI's use of force. Koresh installed himself at the Waco compound, and after many conflicts with the Branch Davidians, getting ousted from Mount Carmel and then returning, he usurped Benjamin Roden and his son George as the leader of the Branch Davidians. But wait, didn't you say there was something about David Koresh raising the dead? Why, yes, I did. In 1987, Koresh and George Roden had themselves a good old-fashioned resurrection duel. Pretty much exactly like it sounds. In what was essentially a divine power pissing contest, the men dug up the corpse of Anna Hughes, who had been dead for 20 years, draped the remains in a Star of David flag, put her on an altar, and shouted scripture over her for days. First one to raise the dead wins. Unfortunately, Anna refused to rise, and the duel turned into a shootout, with Koresh being charged with attempted murder. Koresh was never convicted due to a hung jury, and went on to win Roden's followers over, thus securing his grip on the Branch Davidians. Resurrection is actually a cornerstone of Branch Davidian belief, with many, still to this day, anxiously awaiting the day that David Koresh, along with the others killed at Waco, rise from the dead to herald the judgment and second coming. They believe in soul sleep, which is when a person dies, they lie in their grave devoid of consciousness until God resurrects their body and soul. Of course, the Branch Davidians aren't the only religious group to believe in resurrection. As recently as 2019, a member of the Bethel Church in Northern California started an Instagram campaign with the hashtag #WakeUpOlive, asking for followers to pray for her 2-year-old daughter Olive's resurrection. In her post, she says, "We believe in a Jesus who died and conclusively defeated every grave, holding the keys to resurrection power. We are asking for bold, unified prayers from the global church to stand with us in belief that he will raise this little girl back to life." Along with members of her church, they launched the Wake Up Olive movement. For nearly a week, people from all over the world prayed to God to make Olive rise from the dead. Described as a charismatic megachurch and, you guessed it, a cult, Bethel Church believes that the miracles that appeared in the Bible, water into wine, walking on water, parting the seas, and resurrection are all possible today, and that pretty much anyone can perform them. In fact, thousands of young people have attended their School of Supernatural Ministry, which is a sort of Christian Hogwarts, which sounds like a joke I put in there, but no, that's actually what the students refer to it as, the Christian Hogwarts, where they learn to perform miracles like healing people with incurable diseases and raising the dead. Students practice something called grave soaking, or grave sucking, as it's sometimes called, which involves laying on top of the grave of someone who was believed to possess special powers in hopes of absorbing some of the deceased person's abilities. I'm not saying that Bethel Church and the Branch Davidians are the same thing, but what I am saying is that the desire for immortality is powerful. It's a huge selling point. If, as a leader, you can promise that possibility to your followers, to the right people, it makes a strong case for their loyalty and faith. In just a moment, we will return to our live coverage of the siege in Waco. But first, we must thank Audible for sponsoring this newscast. I'm sorry, I'm being told by my producers that this is actually a video. It's 1993 and I don't know what a YouTube video is, and boy am I better for it. You can go on your Netscape browser to www.audible.com/mortician or text Mortician to 500-500 to get one audiobook, unlimited monthly Audible original downloads, and a 30-day trial, all absolutely free. I'm recommending Waco, A Survivor's Story by David Thibodeau, Leon Weitzen, and Aviva Leighton, which in 1993 hasn't been written yet. Thibodeau actually lived at the compound during the siege and was friends with Koresh. This is the book that inspired that mini-series everyone will be watching in 2020, which we didn't know about before starting research on this video because, gosh forbid, we should ever be culturally relevant in any way on this channel. This book has also been recommended by experts on religion, history, and extreme religious groups, and hearing Thibodeau's account really humanizes the story. You can find the URL and SMS code for the offer in the description below. And don't forget, any audiobook you get from Audible is yours forever. You can go back and re-listen at any time, even if you cancel your membership. You might say your audiobook is immortal. More on that at 7. Back to you. So back at the compound, David Koresh had secured his position as the prophet and leader of the Branch Davidians, and all was relatively calm in Branch Davidian land for about a decade. While they lived in isolation on the compound, many, including Koresh, would go into town regularly and even held jobs. The Branch Davidians were a diverse group from all over the world, including lawyers, business people, educators, even a professor from the University of Hawaii. David Koresh was in a rock band. He had a demo called Madman in Waco. It's better than Charles Manson. At some point, Koresh began stockpiling firearms to both arm his people and sell at gun shows. It was no secret that aside from the Bible and rock and roll, guns were his passion.
It makes nobody's business whether we have a gun or not at this place. Guns are the right of Americans to have. They come in here with a gun and they start shooting at us, what would you do? Tell me, be realistic. This is America, this is not Australia, this is not Europe.
Koresh was overheard saying he prophesied that he would die in a gun battle. On February 28, 1993, 78 agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, or ATF, invaded the Waco compound to serve an arrest and search warrant and raid their weapons. They had been investigating the Branch Davidians for some time concerning violations involving stockpiling firearms and explosives, as well as the reported sexual abuse. But the Branch Davidians had suspected they were being watched and were prepared. Even now, there is controversy as to whether or not the ATF had basis for their search warrant in the first place. Did they have reasonable cause? And the way in which they executed the raid and the violence that ensued has also been criticized. But since the Branch Davidians resisted the search warrant and allegedly took hostile action against the ATF and then later the FBI, they didn't have much of a legal leg to stand on until they turned themselves over for arrest. It's also worth mentioning that while the ATF, FBI, and the media portrayed the Branch Davidians as violent from the get-go, there remains controversy over who shot first on February 28th. Each side says the other shot first. During the investigation into the raid, an ATF agent told an investigator that one of the other agents might have fired the first shot to kill the compound's dogs. But he later retracted his statement and was like, did I say we shot the dogs? No, it was the Branch Davidians that started it. It's statements like that that make it hard to figure out the truth. Regardless of who shot first, what ensued was a 45-minute firefight that left 5 ATF agents and 6 Branch Davidians dead, David Koresh shot and writhing in pain, and 16 more ATF agents injured. From there, the FBI took over, thus beginning a 51-day siege. The siege has been called the largest military force ever gathered against a civilian suspect in American history. The assembly included 20 tanks, 4 combat engineering vehicles, 668 agents, 6 U.S. Customs officers, 15 soldiers from the U.S. Army, 13 members of the Texas National Guard, 31 Texas Rangers, 101 Department of Public Safety officers, 17 members of the McLennan County Sheriff's Office, and 18 Waco police. That's a grand total of 899 law enforcement and government agents versus around 100 Branch Davidian civilians, many of which were children. Over the 51-day siege, the FBI and Koresh negotiated for the Branch Davidians' surrender. More shots are fired from both sides. Women and children are sporadically released. The phone lines are cut. Koresh is permitted to broadcast his teachings over the Christian Broadcasting Network as a bargaining chip for the release of more people. The FBI is concerned that the Branch Davidians will die by mass suicide, but Koresh maintains that suicide is not the plan. It's worth noting that part of the reason it was so hard to get the Branch Davidians released was because the majority did not want to leave. They felt safer with Koresh than with the authorities. Survivor Clive Doyle says in his account that the Branch Davidians would rather stay together in the compound than turn themselves over to the FBI, where they'd be immediately arrested and their children taken away. As the siege wears on, the electricity is shut off to the compound, and the FBI ramps up their efforts to force Koresh into surrender. On March 12th, they begin psychological pressure tactics that are meant to wear the Branch Davidians down. Bright lights are aimed at the buildings 24/7. Loud music like Nancy Sinatra's "These Boots Are Made for Walkin'," or the sound of rabbits being tortured, is constantly blasted at the compound. The combination of the two, Nancy Sinatra and the tortured rabbits, makes rest of any kind impossible. One of the FBI's negotiation tactics was burial of the dead, including the body of a man who was on top of the water tower, Peter Ghent. Koresh and the FBI negotiated that the Branch Davidians would, 1, be permitted to bury the bodies of the dead strewn about the property, and 2, retrieve Ghent's body from over on that water tower and hand that body over to the FBI, all without being fired upon. For a time, all was going well. The bodies of 4 Branch Davidians were hastily buried in a shallow common grave. The plan was to give them a proper burial later, and Ghent's body was slowly lowered down. As the body comes down, shouts come from the other Branch Davidians to leave him there, come back inside quick. The FBI had just called off, allowing them to retrieve Ghent and hand him over. Eventually it was negotiated that, like the others, Ghent could be buried on the compound. As told by Clive Doyle, they attempted to bury Ghent in a spot where he would not be run over by tanks. The tanks ran over the graves anyway. On April 14th, Koresh said that he would not surrender until he was allowed to write a manuscript explaining the 7 seals and how he was the lamb who could set loose the prophecies on the apocalypse. While the FBI agreed to let him write out the 7 seals, they also feared that this would create a boiling point with the exhausted and unstable Branch Davidians that could end in mass suicide. Though, to be fair, the instability and exhaustion might be in part because of the constant lights and rabbit torture noises. Koresh tells the FBI that he needs more time, but unbeknownst to him, a plan to use tear gas against the Branch Davidians is being discussed with Attorney General Janet Reno. Concluding that the siege was in a stalemate, Reno approves the plan to use CS gas on April 17th. On April 19th, the plan was put into action. The amount of tear gas used on the Branch Davidians in one morning, many of them young children, was equivalent to the amount of gas that would typically be used in a 48-hour period. As the assault wore on throughout the morning, the FBI used combat engineering vehicles, essentially tanks, to ram into the building's walls. They claimed they were attempting to create ways for the Branch Davidians to escape the gas, but due to the building's poor construction, any exits were blocked by collapse and debris. In effect, they were tearing down the buildings with the people still inside. Then, a fire started. Now, there's controversy as to who started the fire. Arson experts point to evidence that the Branch Davidians themselves started the fire, and the surviving Branch Davidians say they did not. Regardless, Catherine Wessinger, professor and expert on apocalyptic groups and the Branch Davidian siege, has called the FBI's actions indefensible. Quote, "If the FBI believed they were dealing with members of a cult who were not in their right minds, then why would the FBI put so much pressure on them and ultimately carry out an assault which just confirmed David Koresh's prophecies?" After the fire started, the building was decimated within an hour. By noon, it was over. Only 9 Branch Davidians survived that day. As with previous surrenders, all were arrested. Clive Doyle describes his experience of escaping the burning compound building. "As I turned the corner, one of the agents outside a tank started screaming at me to come over to him. My left ankle was all blistered, the skin was rolling off my hands, and my face was burned down to the right side of my neck where the mask had been. I guess I took my mask off right after I got out. It was kind of melting onto my face. He was cussing me out, telling me that if I made a false move, he was going to blow my so-and-so head off. But he said, 'You're going to remember this day for the rest of your life.' I thought, at least that is a true statement." Even now, experts are critical about the violence the FBI used against Koresh and the Branch Davidians, saying that they escalated the situation instead of de-escalating it. They have also been criticized for the manipulation of the media, and in turn, the public's perception of the cult. Many experts recommend against using the term cult in relation to the Branch Davidians and other such religious groups, as it's immediately stigmatizing and reductive. Calling the Branch Davidians a cult legitimizes what the FBI did to them, and it can be dangerous. Even if we are to assume that Koresh's followers were brainwashed and victims of abuse, how does the government gassing, shooting, and psychologically torturing them serve to help those victims? After the April 19th assault, the remains from the Branch Davidian compound were taken to the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's Office for autopsy and identification. The MEs, Dr. Nizam Pirwani and Dr. Rodney Crow, concluded that 75 individuals, 50 adults and 25 children, died from the fire inside the compound. Only 35 positive identifications could be made, while 40 of the bodies remain unidentified. While poisoning from the tear gas was not a direct cause of death, it's believed the gas could have incapacitated people, making it then impossible for them to escape the fire. Many of the Branch Davidians died of asphyxiation. Some were huddled under wet blankets and were killed in the collapse of the structure. Furthermore, there were numerous close-range gunshot wounds, specifically in the bunker or vault where the majority of women and children were hiding. The medical examiner suspected that there were many mercy killings that day. But unlike, say, a Jonestown or Heaven's Gate, the bodies were not consistent with mass suicide. In the 1994 trial of the Branch Davidian survivors, the ME, Dr. Pirwani, testified as to what the dead revealed about the events of April 19th. Essentially, the prosecution attempted to paint a picture that the Branch Davidians died by self-inflicted wounds, carrying out some sort of premeditated mass suicide. But in the cross-examination, Dr. Pirwani seemed to say otherwise. Dr. Pirwani went through each of the causes of death for the unidentified bodies, and most were fire-related. He went on to say definitively that the tanks that tore the building apart created falling debris that killed individuals, and ripped holes in the floor through which people fell and were killed. Even in death, through forensics, the bodies were able to speak for themselves about the reality of what happened to them in the compound. It should be noted that there was a report issued by the Department of Justice called the Scruggs Report, denying any incendiary, meaning fire-starting, rounds were used by the FBI on April 19th. but the report was later called negligent and improperly rushed to its conclusion solely for political purposes. The FBI kept insisting that the Branch Davidians absolutely set fire to themselves, until 1999, 6 years later, when they finally admitted to the use of pyrotechnic tear gas rounds, ones that, wait for it, could set things on fire. After all was said and done, all of the Branch Davidian survivors were acquitted of any charges related to the intent to murder FBI agents. 1 was acquitted of all the charges, and 5 were sentenced to 40 years. Their sentences were eventually reduced, and 3 were sentenced for 5 to 20 years. The convictions were a combination of voluntary manslaughter and using firearms in commission of a crime. As of 2007, all have been released from prison. But what happened to the dead of the Waco siege? Any remains that could be claimed by family were given a funeral and burial. Between September and October of 1994, 30 of the Branch Davidians' unclaimed or unidentified dead were given what has been called a pauper's burial at Restland Cemetery in McLennan County, Texas. Buried in simple wooden caskets, the graves are marked by small stones that either say the individual's name or unknown. The bodies were buried by the government after being held by the medical examiner for 18 months without any ceremony or proper notification of the survivors. Initially, Koresh's grandmother had tried to stop the bodies from being buried to use as evidence in her lawsuit against the federal government. But a medical examiner deemed the bodies too badly decomposed, and the government proceeded with the burials. The survivors of the siege were infuriated by this burial, claiming that the government was burying their dead like animals. They had wanted the bodies buried on the site of the Mount Carmel compound, but zoning restrictions prohibited it. And to this day, the bodies have not been moved. David Koresh is buried in Tyler Memorial Park and Cemetery in Tyler, Texas. And there's a memorial to the ATF agents who were killed in the raid at St. Joseph Catholic Church in Elk, Texas. A memorial to the Branch Davidian massacre stands at the Mount Carmel compound in Waco.
We walked into the church here, and there was a group of about 5 people praying, so we didn't want to barge in. They just gave kind of a nice wave. And we turned around and came out here, and I think this is actually the foundations of the original Waco settlement, the site of the siege. It's so peaceful out here. I can really tell why they wanted to be out here in the first place. I think there's power in allowing a group to create their own memorial. But your problem with a mass shooting in a large public place is that there's nothing that centralizes that group in many cases other than being victims. Whereas the Branch Davidians had their own religion that makes building a church make a lot of sense for them.
We're not a channel about extreme religious groups. When we talk about an event that's already been exhaustively dissected for decades, it's because we think it's important to talk about what the media largely ignored, the dead, and what they can tell us. Just like the Jonestown episode of our podcast, which I'll link below if you're interested, what we hope to bring to the conversation is not the salaciousness of the deaths, but what happened to the bodies, and how they were both handled and used to reveal truths about what really happened. As always, what can we learn from the dead? The takeaway from this video is that it's not simply a story of a bonkers cult threatening doomsday murder and suicide. It's a story about faith and loyalty and the abuse of power. The behavior of law enforcement makes this story relevant now more than ever. I'm just regular Caitlin now, but I'm still wearing this outfit, so it's fun. Thank you again to Audible for sponsoring this video, which is helping us to support the work of the Colibri Center for Human Rights. Colibri was the first organization we ever made a donation to. Thousands of migrants have lost their lives attempting to cross the US-Mexico border. Colibri uses forensic techniques and DNA testing to help family members find their missing dead and find answers. You can help us by going to audible.com/mortician or texting mortician to 500-500, and you can learn more about the Caliber Center below. This video was made with generous donations from death enthusiasts just like you. At some point, Koresh, who's that? And the media portrayed the Branch Davidian, raising the dead? Pew pew, pew pew. I mean, right? Resurrection is actually a cornerstone of Branch. Closing your door quietly is a cornerstone of my belief. That's the one I want. It's fun. We're fun over here. Ain't we got fun? Everybody wear a mask. I can do much better than that. That was not well delivered. Again, wear a mask. You can do better. So much better. Wear a mask.